Well, Dr. Anthony Cardillo is kind enough to join us today. He's a Men Urgent Care CEO and emergency medical specialist, to give us a little bit of insight, perhaps.
Yeah, Dr. Cardillo, we talked to you about so many different things, and because you are in an ER all the time, you've seen trauma as well as illness. And so in examining that hit on the field and the fact that this player then stood up and then went down, what are you able to tell from that little bit of video?
Certainly, David. Well, what we can tell is that the event was most probably secondary to that hit. There are other episodes where athletes are running, they're exerting themselves, and will have a ventricular arrhythmia secondary to a hypertrophic or enlarged heart. That's different. This was traumatic. And we see that hit happened in that upper chest area. And there are a couple of things that could happen under this scenario. The first we think about, obviously, is the spinal cord injury. It doesn't seem like that's what happened here. Because when you have a spinal cord injury that does injure acutely that cervical spine, you don't get back up. You're on the floor and you'll stay on the floor. He was able to get back up. That leads us to believe this was more of a cardiac injury. When you have a cardiac injury, a couple of things, again, could happen. With a large enough hit to the anterior chest, you can transect the aorta, the large blood vessel coming out of that heart. But when that happens, number one, that's not survivable usually, and you don't stand up after that kind of injury. Even if it was a mild dissection, these are very significant injuries. It's a very common injury. The third thing we're thinking about, it's called the R-on-T phenomenon. This is a phenomenon that when the heart is going between its beats, as that heart is depolarizing and then repolarizing, if you have traumatic trauma to the chest, at a very specific moment, as that heart is repolarizing itself, you can go into a lethal ventricular arrhythmia. And that's what it looks like it happened, because he was able to stand up, and at that point, his heart started what we call fibrillating. That's that cardiac arrest. That's when he collapsed back down, and they would have recognized at that point no pulse. If it had been a cervical injury, you wouldn't expect him to have lost his pulse that soon. Same thing with a transection of the aorta. You may still have a pulse for a very brief moment. At this time, he had no pulse when he hit the ground. That's more of a ventricular arrhythmia that he was having. This is a dysrhythmia that happens after trauma. Now, the mainstay of treatment would have been, number one, protecting his airway, and then defibrillating the patient. We know that we have AEDs, or the automated defibrillators, all around our community. I am certain that they were in that facility. They were also on the ambulance, and we hope that he was defibrillated quickly. And that brings the heart back relatively quickly, because it shocks that dysrhythmia back into a normal heartbeat. They would have immediately intubated him and protected his airway, which they did. And if they're able to bring that heart back by defibrillating him at this juncture, whether he survives or not, it will be dependent upon how long he was down and how long he was not getting oxygen. And now it sounds like he is in the ICU or in the medical facility, intubated at this time with a heartbeat. That's the information we're hearing right now. That means that he was most likely brought out of that lethal dysrhythmia, and now it's going to be dependent upon how long he was down and how much anoxia his brain would have sustained.
Well, the early reports mentioned that there were 9 minutes of CPR performed. Given the different scenarios that you have given us, what are the survivability rates? And I know it is speculation, it's early, but what is your opinion on that?
Yeah, 9 minutes is kind of a long time, and we're worried about that. About 3 minutes is when you start having brain injury. So 9 minutes is a long time. I think there's a delay, guys. Are you still seeing the delay on your side also?
We do have a delay, but your voice is just right. So we're on point with what you're saying, okay? So, we just caught up. So I think you're good.
Great. Yeah, so the name of the game here is really that 9 to 10 minutes that he was down, and how much injury that brain would have suffered from having the anoxia. We know about 3 minutes is when you start having really significant brain damage. However, he's very young. He's 24. He's a highly conditioned athlete. So he has a lot of reserve. And so it's possible that he will do fine if this is what we're talking. We don't really know the underlying cause yet. It could be a number of things, but the most likely is this arrhythmogenic phenomenon that happens when you have blunt chest trauma as the heart is going through its phases. If that's the case, he would have been shocked, intubated, and now it's a matter of seeing how much damage happened to the brain.
Yeah, that makes complete sense to what we were able to witness and how they were working on him. Dr. Cardillo, I can't say it enough. You're always our go-to doctor. You're perfect in this situation. You make a lot of sense to the injury that we just witnessed. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah. Thank you so much.